Hello guys, this is Real Recaps. In this video, I will talk about a 2024 American black comedy psychological thriller film, A Different Man. Before we start, I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel. The film begins with a man named Edward, groaning in discomfort in his office, but it turns out that this entire scene is just a performance. In reality, Edward suffers from a rare condition called neurofibromatosis, which has caused severe disfigurement to his face. To make a living, he relies on low-budget commercials. Later, as he is riding the subway home, Edward notices that several passengers are staring and laughing at him. However, he remains silent and unreactive, as he has grown accustomed to this behavior. Soon after, he arrives at his building, which is run down and dirty. He encounters his landlord at the entrance, who suggests that Edward try taking some martial arts classes to defend himself. Edward then goes to his apartment, where he meets Ingrid, a beautiful woman who is moving in next door. She is initially taken aback by his appearance but quickly recovers and greets him warmly. Once inside his apartment, which is in a terrible state with dirty water leaking from the ceiling, Edward places a bowl on the floor to catch the water, instead of fixing the problem right away. That evening, while Edward is chopping onions in the kitchen, someone knocks on his door, startling him and causing him to injure his finger. He opens the door to find Ingrid, and when she notices the bleeding, she immediately offers to help with first aid. The two sit together on the couch as Ingrid tends to his injury, making light jokes to ease the tension. It is clear that Ingrid doesn't view Edward as a monster and feels comfortable around him. After tending to his wound, Ingrid spots a framed picture on the wall of a young, healthy Edward with his mother. Throughout their conversation, Edward responds with only short answers, as he's not used to socializing, but Ingrid doesn't mind. She soon notices a typewriter in the room where Edward has written a heartfelt quote about himself, which impresses her. She reveals that she is a playwright. Edward, in turn, shares that he performs in small gigs. Eventually, Ingrid reveals that she came to ask for some detergent, and Edward happily gives her some, marking the beginning of their friendship. The scene shifts to the next morning, where Edward visits the doctor for a routine checkup. The doctor informs him that while his tumors are growing slowly, there is no immediate cause for concern. The doctor then mentions that a colleague, Eugene, has developed a potential cure for neurofibromatosis and is looking for patients to test the new drug. He urges Edward to consider participating, as it could change his life. Later, upon returning to his apartment, Edward notices that the water leak has worsened, so he replaces the small bowl with a larger bucket. He then brings the typewriter to Ingrid as a housewarming gift. She is delighted by the thoughtful gesture, and Edward is happy to be able to connect with someone. However, his mood sours when Ingrid's boyfriend arrives, and they close the door in his face. In the next scene, Edward struggles to find acting work. He auditions for a local gig and performs admirably, but it's still not enough to impress the judges. It's clear that his acting ability isn't the issue. The only source of brightness in Edward's otherwise bleak life is Ingrid, his beautiful neighbor. When Edward shows Ingrid one of his commercials, she praises his performance. She then notices a blackhead on his nose and tries to remove it, but when she touches his face, Edward's emotional instincts cause him to grab her hand, creating an awkward moment. Ingrid quickly makes an excuse and leaves. Edward feels crushed, regretting that he missed his chance to grow closer to her and believing things would have been different if he were more attractive. The next morning, he decides to take a chance and try Eugene's new drug. A team of medical professionals closely monitors Edward as they administer the drug. His face is connected to various tubes, and the drug is injected. A prototype mask of his face is created to track progress, and he is given pills and other medications to take regularly. That evening, when Edward returns home, he finds a box on his doorstep containing chocolates, face cream, and detergent, along with a thank you note from Ingrid. She claims to have written it using the typewriter he gave her. Elated by the gesture, Edward tries to eat the chocolates, but he immediately spits them out due to sharp pain in his teeth. He then removes the bandage from his hand, only to be shocked to find that the wound has healed remarkably fast. At midnight, Edward is awakened by loud noises outside. He opens the door to find several police officers and paramedics and is devastated to learn that his neighbor has taken his own life. Edward also notices a cat in the room and takes it with him. Later, Edward and Ingrid meet at a diner, where they discuss the tragic event before switching topics to Ingrid's work. When Edward returns home, a heavy rainstorm has worsened the condition of his ceiling. As he examines it, a large piece of debris falls on his face, and he cleans the new wound. As he scrubs, bits of skin start peeling away, indicating that the medicine is beginning to work. The next morning, Dr. Eugene is astounded at how quickly the drug is having an effect on Edward, reassuring him that he's healing. He gives Edward the prototype mask as a souvenir and a reminder, though Edward is reluctant to accept it. Later, as Edward makes his way home, he is in poor condition, coughing and struggling to breathe. He stops at a bar, heads to the restroom, and vomits to relieve himself. On his way back, the bartender insists he have a drink since only customers can use the washroom. Edward agrees and drinks whiskey straight, which turns out to be a bad decision as he vomits again. That night, back at home, Edward cries uncontrollably, unable to cope with the severe pain caused by the drug. In a state of despair, he starts pulling the skin off his face, which is unexpectedly elastic. As he continues, he reveals a flawless face beneath, having scraped away all the excess tissue. A week later, Edward has undergone a complete transformation. His facial deformity is gone, and he now appears as a handsome young man. To celebrate his newfound appearance, he goes to a bar and orders whiskey. The night takes a turn for the better as people treat him much differently, even making new friends and engaging in intimate relations, likely for the first time in his life. The following morning, Edward returns home, hungover and exhausted. Before he can rest, there's a knock at the door. It's the repairman finally coming to fix the ceiling. The repairman, not recognizing Edward, is frustrated by how much worse the hole has gotten but gets to work right away. Soon after, Dr. Eugene arrives, visibly worried, asking for Edward. It turns out that Edward has not been to the lab or returned any of their calls in the past week. Edward, now wanting to distance himself, lies and claims he is a family friend named Guy, stating that Edward took his life and was cremated. Dr. Eugene is taken aback, shocked by the news, having worked so hard on his treatment. Unknown to them, Ingrid overhears the conversation from her apartment and is deeply distressed. Time passes, and Edward's life has dramatically changed. He now lives in a luxurious home, wears high-end suits, and works as a successful real estate agent. Everyone at work respects him, and his face is even seen on subway posters. However, he keeps his true identity secret and goes by the name Guy Moritz. One day, while walking down the street, Edward spots Ingrid. Still harboring feelings for her, he secretly follows her. Ingrid enters a theater where auditions for a play titled Edward are being held. It turns out that she's writing a play based on her neighbor, Edward, who she believes is dead. Edward crosses paths with Ingrid and the other actors, where he's asked if he's there for the audition. After a moment of hesitation, they give him the script, and he reluctantly takes the stage. Despite his nervousness, Edward performs admirably. A few days later, another audition is held for the lead role of Edward. Several actors with facial deformities wait in line, and Edward, still under the name Guy Moritz, attends. Upon entering, Ingrid is taken aback by his mask, but Edward claims he's wearing it to feel like the character. This time, Edward performs with newfound confidence, using his own experience to deliver an extraordinary performance, leaving Ingrid impressed. Later, at a dinner with the crew, Ingrid praises his acting, and Edward fabricates a story about being inspired by his late friend who also had neurofibromatosis. After dinner, Ingrid takes Edward back to her apartment where he encounters his old typewriter. He jokingly asks if she uses it, but Ingrid admits she never has and offers to let him take it back. While slightly disappointed, Edward is elated when he learns that Ingrid had adopted his pet cat. He is even happier to hear that Ingrid has broken up with her boyfriend and is no longer in contact with him. After some light-hearted conversation and dancing, they end up in her bedroom where they have a passionate night together. The next day at the theater, during rehearsals, a stranger with neurofibromatosis appears, saying he had come for the audition. Although the role is already filled, he wishes everyone good luck before leaving. Later, Edward runs into the same man at work, and the stranger, addressing him by his real name, reveals that he is working on a play. The man introduces himself as Oswald and apologizes for any earlier misunderstandings before walking away. As time goes by, Edward and Ingrid begin to have disagreements regarding the play. Ingrid insists she knows more about the character Edward since she wrote the script, while Edward, the real Edward, remains silent about his true identity. Oswald reappears, and during the conversation, reveals that Guy Moritz also works as a real estate agent. Ingrid is surprised by this, and Oswald agrees to observe their play. Dinner that night goes well, with Oswald impressing Ingrid and others with his charm. He suggests that the character Edward should have an accent, and Ingrid likes the idea, asking Edward to try it. Unfortunately, his attempt is far from convincing. Days pass, and Edward's acting deteriorates as he repeatedly forgets his lines. Then, Ingrid makes a shocking announcement. Oswald will now play the role of Edward, as he resembles the character more, and Guy Moritz will become a secondary character. Edward, furious with the decision, argues, but Ingrid reveals that Oswald pressured her into the change, though Oswald claims he didn't intend to permanently replace Edward. Forced to accept the situation, Edward begrudgingly agrees. The play eventually opens to critical success. Edward becomes somewhat well known, but his frustration grows as Oswald receives all the attention, including Ingrid's. Things worsen when Ingrid informs Edward that he is no longer needed for the play, promising to cast him in another production. From then on, Edward becomes increasingly paranoid, spying on Oswald. He notices Oswald with a woman and a child, which leads him to suspect that Oswald has a family. Edward shares his suspicions with Ingrid, but she dismisses his concerns, explaining that Oswald was only spending time with his ex-wife and daughter. She also reveals that Oswald will be moving into the apartment Edward once lived in. Enraged, Edward returns to his old apartment and makes a hole in the ceiling once more. Edward's career in real estate also begins to falter as he starts meeting clients while wearing his old deformed mask. One day, he storms into his office and quits, creating a scene and trashing his computer. He then heads to the theater, seeking to confront Oswald, blaming him for his downfall. During their confrontation, a piece of the set falls on Edward, breaking both his arms and legs. Unable to move, Edward moves in with Ingrid and Oswald in the same apartment. To his dismay, the couple is now together and planning to turn Edward into a movie. Several months later, Edward is still recovering from his injuries while Ingrid is pregnant. A physical therapist is hired to help him walk, but the therapist expresses disgust that a deformed man like Oswald could be with someone as beautiful as Ingrid. This infuriates Edward, and when the therapist is distracted, he stabs him. This act lands Edward in prison for a long time. Years later, an older Edward is released from prison. He wanders the streets and encounters Oswald, who greets him with a hug. They later meet Ingrid for dinner, where it's revealed that the couple has become highly successful and plans to move to a commune in Canada. When the waiter arrives to take their orders, Edward struggles to choose from the menu, and Oswald jokes that Edward hasn't changed at all. The end. Thanks for watching.